Beneath the indifferent gaze of the frost-kissed moon, death whispered promises of silence to the Forsaken. The executioner's axe fell with the precision of winter's first gale, severing not just flesh, but the fragile thread of Lionea Doran's existence. Dawn had barely clawed its way over the jagged peaks of the Ironfang Mountains when the court of Eldridge Keep gathered on the frost-rimed scaffold. The air hung heavy with the metallic tang of impending snow mingling with the acrid smoke from the braziers that flanked the platform, torches sputtering like dying stars against the encroaching gray. Lionea, the Omega accused of treason, stood bound in chains that bit into her wrists, her bare feet numb on the blood-stained planks. She had not spoken a word of denial. What use were pleas to a pack that had already devoured her innocence? The charges were a tapestry of lies, woven by envious betas and a rival alpha's ambition. Poisoning the royal hunt's waters, consorting with shadow wraiths from the whispering woods. Lionea knew the truth, that she had only gathered herbs under the same moon that now watched her end. But truth was a luxury for the powerful. King Malric Fenroth, the Alpha whose throne loomed above the courtyard like a shadowed sentinel, had turned his face away. His silhouette, etched against the rising light, carried the weight of a realm fractured by endless border skirmishes with the southern clans. Guilt flickered in his steel-gray eyes, a momentary storm cloud, but duty bound him tighter than any chain. The kingdom teetered on the edge of war. Mercy for an Omega could unravel alliances forged in blood and oath. As the axe descended, Lionea's world fractured into shards of white-hot pain. The crowd's murmurs swelled into a howl, carried on the biting wind that swept down from the peaks, scattering the first flakes of snow like ashes from a funeral pyre. Her blood, warm and defiant, sprayed across the scaffold, staining the snow that dusted the stones below a deep crimson. She felt it pool beneath her, a river of accusation, before darkness claimed her. The last sight burned into her fading vision, the lunar sigil etched into the hilt of the executioner's blade, a mocking emblem of the goddess who had forsaken her kind. They left her body in the forest of eternal twilight, a forsaken glade where the trees twisted like tormented spirits under perpetual shadow. Wolves, true beasts, not shifters, circled the edges, their eyes gleaming amber in the dim light. But even they shied from the scent of fresh death mingled with the Omega's faint, lingering jasmine. The guards who dumped her there, wrapped in a coarse shroud stained with her own blood, muttered prayers to the moon goddess, Elowen, as if to ward off the curse of wrongful spilling. "Let the earth take her," one spat, his breath fogging in the chill. "The goddess claims her own." They retreated swiftly, their torches bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps until swallowed by the tree line, leaving Lionea to the mercy of the wild. The forest was a cathedral of silence, broken only by the soughing wind through skeletal branches and the distant weevo of a lone wolf echoing off the crags. Snow began to fall in earnest, veiling her form in a shroud of white, each flake a feather-light kiss from the indifferent sky. Lionea's body lay still, her chestnut hair fanned across the frozen ground like spilled ink, her skin pale as the marble effigies in the castle's crypt. The wound at her neck gaped, a ragged mouth silenced forever, yet in the pooling blood that seeped into the earth, something stirred, an unnatural warmth, like the first ember of a hidden fire. Hours bled into twilight, the sun surrendering to the moon's pale dominion. The lunar sigil, that cursed mark on the blade, seemed to pulse in Lionea's mind, though her eyes stared blankly at the canopy above. It was no mere decoration. It was the goddess's own brand, a symbol of hidden paths and reclaimed fates, whispered in ancient Omega lore. Lionea had borne a faint echo of it since birth, a silvery crescent on her inner wrist, dismissed as a birthmark by those who scorned her station. Now, in death's quiet embrace, it tingled, as if the forest itself breathed life back into her veins. The wind howled louder, whipping snow into frenzied spirals that danced around her like spectral guardians. from the depths of the glade. A low rumble built, not thunder, but the earth's lament. Lyonea's fingers twitched, the first betrayal of her supposed end. Pain lanced through her, not the sharp agony of the axe, but a deeper unraveling, as if threads of her soul were being rewoven under the moon's unblinking eye. The blood in the snow began to recede, drawn back into her flesh like a tide obeying the lunar pull. Her chest heaved once, twice, a ragged gasp that shattered the silence. She rose, not with the grace of the living, but with the inexorable certainty of destiny unveiled. The shroud fell away, revealing her form clad in the simple woolen shift of her execution, now torn and bloodied. The wound at her neck knit itself closed, leaving only a thin, luminous scar that glowed faintly silver, the lunar sigil reborn on her skin. It pulsed with an inner light, casting ethereal shadows on the snow-draped ferns. Lyonea's eyes, once hazel pools of quiet defiance, now burned with an otherworldly clarity, reflecting the moon's cold fire. The forest held its breath as she stood, unsteady at first, the chill seeping into her bones like an old friend. The wind carried scents of pine and distant smoke, of the castle's hearths and the court's festering secrets. Vengeance? No, that was a chain she would not wear. Judgment, perhaps. The weighing of souls under Elowin's gaze. Lyoneia turned toward the tree line, her bare feet leaving no mark on the untouched snow. The path to Eldridge Keep called, a bridge of ice and stone spanning the chasm between death and reckoning. In the distance, the castle's spires pierced the night sky, their windows flickering with torchlight. The court slumbered uneasily, haunted by the echo of her final breath. But midnight approached, and with it, the Omega who had been slain would return, not as a ghost, but as the goddess's herald. Her forehead now bearing the full sigil, a crescent moon aglow with divine wrath and mercy intertwined. The kingdom would answer, or it would shatter like frost under the sun. The bridge to Eldridge Keep arched like a spine of ancient bone over the yawning chasm, its stones slick with midnight frost, and the perpetual mist rising from the abyss below. Lyonea's bare feet met the cold, unyielding surface without a sound, each step a silent defiance against the weight of her resurrection. The lunar sigil on her forehead throbbed with a rhythm that echoed her pulse, its silver glow cutting through the darkness like a blade of moonlight. It was no mere scar now. It was a beacon, drawing the night's secrets to her skin, whispering of judgments yet to be spoken. The wind clawed at her tattered shift, carrying the distant clamor of the castle, torches hissing in iron sconces, the low murmur of guards on the ramparts, and beneath it all, the restless stirring of a pack uneasy in their dens. She had not planned this return. It was woven into her bones by Elowin's unyielding hand. The forest's chill lingered in her veins, mingling with the faint coppery taste of her own blood that still haunted her tongue. Fear coiled in her chest, not of the death she had escaped, but of the living who awaited, the ones who had bound her, accused her, and severed her from the world with lies as sharp as the axe. Yet curiosity burned brighter, a forbidden flame. What secrets did the sigil hold? Why had the goddess chosen her, an Omega cast aside like winter's first wilted bloom, to bear this mark of divine reckoning? The castle loomed closer, its walls of gray stone veined with ice, rising like the jagged teeth of some primordial beast. Lyonea's breath fogged the air, each exhale a fragile cloud that dissolved into the night. She felt the pull of the pack's essence, a tangled web of scents and instincts that once had been her home, musk of alphas, the earthy tang of betas, the subtle jasmine of her own kind, now forever altered by the earth's reclaiming touch. The bridge trembled faintly under an approaching storm, or perhaps it was the earth's own heartbeat syncing with hers. From the shadowed tree line beyond the chasm, a figure emerged, not a guard, but a lone rider on a steed as black as congealed blood, its flanks lathered with sweat and foam. King Malric Fenroth urged the beast forward, his cloak billowing like ragged wings against the gale. He had slipped from the keep in secrecy, haunted by the execution's echo that clawed at his conscience. The court's verdict had been swift, a necessary poison to appease the rival alphas from the southern clans, whose whispers of treason had poisoned the air like fog off the marshes. But Malric, whose crown was forged in the fires of endless war, carried the wound deeper than any blade. Guilt was his constant shadow, a melancholy tide that eroded the steel of his resolve. He had turned away as the axe fell, not from indifference, but from the crushing weight of duty. Eldridge's fragile peace demanded sacrifice, and Lyonia had been the offering. The horse's hooves struck the bridge with a hollow ring, echoing like accusations in the void. Malric's eyes, storm-gray and shadowed by the furrow of old battles, scanned the mist ahead. He sought solitude in the wilds, a momentary escape from the throne room's stifling intrigue, where betas plotted in corners and omegas like Lyonia were mere pawns in the game of power. The wind carried a scent to him then, jasmine laced with blood, and something unearthly like the crisp bite of lunar frost. His alpha instincts flared, a primal warning that set his hackles rising. The beast beneath him shied, nostrils flaring, as if sensing the divine rift in the air. Lyonia froze mid-step, her body instinctively curling against the stone parapet. The sigil on her forehead pulsed hotter, illuminating her face in ethereal silver. She knew that scent, pine smoke and iron resolve, the king's own mark that had once stirred a forbidden longing in her heart during quiet moments in the servants' hall. Fear gripped her. Would he strike her down again, this time without the veil of ceremony? Yet curiosity bloomed amidst the terror, drawing her gaze to the rider. In his silhouette, she saw not the tyrant of the court, but a man fractured by the crown's thorns, his broad shoulders bowed under invisible chains. Malric reined in the horse, its breath heaving like bellows in the forge. His hand went to the hilt of his sword, the lunar sigil on its pommel catching the moonlight, a twin to the one now blazing on her skin. Who treads the bridge at midnight? His voice was a low rumble, laced with the gravel of exhaustion and war's toll, carrying across the chasm like a wolf's challenge. He dismounted with predatory grace, boots crunching on the frost, his cloak parting to reveal armor scarred by southern blades. Up close, the lines of guilt etched his face deeper, eyes widening as recognition dawned. The girl he had condemned, Lyonia, the quiet Omega whose hazel eyes had haunted his dreams since dawn, stood before him, alive, radiant, impossible. She met his stare, her own eyes holding the moon's unyielding clarity. Instinct surged between them, an invisible thread pulling taut, alpha to omega, king to outcast, guilt to judgment. But she denied it, stepping back as if scorched, her hand rising to shield the sigil's glow. "The dead do not answer to the living, Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread woven with the forest's hush, trembling with the fear of what this encounter might unleash. The wind howled louder, whipping snowflakes into a veil that blurred the space between them, yet the connection lingered, born of terror and an unwelcome spark of wonder. Malric's breath caught, his sword hand trembling, not from cold, but from the unraveling of certainties. The sigil on her forehead mirrored his blade's emblem, a sign from Eloin he could no longer ignore. He took a step forward, the bridge groaning under the weight of unspoken truths, as the first fat flakes of snow began to fall, veiling their forms in white. What strength was this, if not the mercy of a second chance denied? And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The snow fell thicker now, a relentless veil that muffled the world's sharp edges, turning the bridge into a threshold between realms. Leonia's heart thundered in her chest, a wild drumbeat against the cage of her ribs, as Malric's gaze pierced the flurry like a lance. The lunar sigil on her forehead burned, not with pain, but with a fierce, insistent warmth that spread through her veins like liquid silver, urging her to stand firm. She could feel it pulsing in sync with the king's own heartbeat, an unwelcome tether that stirred the Omega instincts she had long buried beneath layers of resignation. Fear coiled tight in her gut, mingling with a treacherous curiosity. Why did his presence, once a distant storm on the throne, now feel like the earth's own gravity pulling her under? Malric's sword remained half-drawn, its blade catching the moon's glow, the sigil on its pommel flickering as if recognizing its twin on her skin. He took another step, boots scraping the ice-slick stones, his breath ragged plumes in the freezing air. "Leonia," he murmured, the name slipping from his lips like a confession, heavy with the guilt that had shadowed him since dawn. Up close, the lines of his face told stories of battles won and souls lost, scars tracing his jaw like frozen rivers, eyes stormy with the weight of a crown that demanded blood for peace. He had condemned her to preserve the fragile alliances, to silence the Southern Alpha's accusations that threatened to ignite war anew. But now, seeing her alive, marked by the goddess's hand, doubt cracked the armor of his resolve. "This cannot be. The axe. I saw the blood." She backed away, the parapet's chill seeping through her thin shift, her bare skin prickling with the wind's icy fingers. The scent of him, pine resin from the royal hunts, mingled with the faint iron tang of old wounds, assailed her, stirring memories of stolen glances in the great hall, where she had mended linens and he had brooded over maps stained with strategy. Instinct screamed to flee, to vanish into the mist-shrouded chasm, but the sigil held her rooted, its glow illuminating the raw vulnerability in his stare. "You saw what duty required," she replied, her voice a whisper carried on the gale, laced with the bitterness of betrayal. Yet beneath it lay a flicker of empathy, unbidden and sharp as a thorn. He was no monster, this king. He was a man forged in fire, his melancholy a mirror to her own shattered faith. Before words could bridge the chasm between them, a guttural howl shattered the night, not the wind's lament, but the savage cry of wolves, amplified by the shift of men. From the castle's shadowed gates, torches erupted like angry stars, bobbing in a frantic procession. Shouts echoed across the void. "Treachery! The Omega's ghost rises!" The southern envoys, those viper-tongued alphas who had woven her false charges, had stirred the court into frenzy. One among them, Lord Varen of the Marsh clans, led the charge, his form hulking on a war-horse, eyes gleaming with fanatic zeal. He had coveted Malric's throne, using Leonia's treason as the spark to fracture Eldridge's unity. Now, her return was a divine indictment, and they would not let it stand. Malric whirled, his hand clamping around her wrist with alpha urgency, the contact sending a jolt through her like lightning over frozen peaks. "Run," he growled, but there was no command in it, only the raw edge of protection, his body shielding hers as the riders thundered onto the bridge. The horses' hooves pounded like war drums, snow spraying in arcs that glittered under torchlight. Varen's voice boomed, a thunderclap of accusation. "The witch returns to curse us! Slay her again, Fenroth, or prove your weakness to the clans!" Leonia's pulse raced, the sigil flaring brighter, its light casting Malric's face in stark relief, guilt warring with defiance in his eyes. She could have pulled away, let the fray consume him as recompense for her death. But the thread between them tightened, empathy blooming in the soil of shared peril. His grip was not chains, but an anchor against the storm. Together, they bolted toward the bridge's end, the king's steed abandoned in the chaos. The wind whipped at them, carrying the acrid smoke of the torches and the metallic promise of drawn steel. Arrows whistled past, one grazing Malric's cloak, tearing fabric with a hiss. They plunged into the tree line beyond the castle walls, the forest swallowing them in its shadowed embrace. Branches clawed at Lionea's arms, drawing thin lines of blood that mingled with the snow. But she felt no pain, only the surge of survival, intertwined with the king's labored breaths beside her. He guided her to a hidden cleft in the rock face, a narrow cavern veiled by icicles like jagged teeth, its mouth exhaling a faint, earthy warmth from subterranean springs. They tumbled inside, collapsing against the damp stone as the riders' cries faded into the night, thwarted by the labyrinthine woods. In the dim glow of the sigil, which now cast flickering shadows on the cavern walls like lunar tapestries, Lionea met Malric's gaze. The air between them hummed with unspoken truths, the chill of the stone pressing against her back, the distant drip of water echoing their heartbeats. His hand lingered near hers, not touching, but close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin, scarred and calloused from years of wielding both sword and scepter. Guilt etched deeper into his features, a melancholy tide that softened the Alpha's edges. "I failed you," he admitted, voice rough as gravel under boot, eyes dropping to the luminous scar at her neck. "The court's lies. I chose the pack over one life, but Elowen has judged me unworthy." She studied him, the Omega in her sensing the fracture in his soul, the king who had lost kin to southern blades, who bore the weight of a realm's fragile peace on shoulders bowed by endless winter. Empathy stirred, unresisted now, transforming fear into a fragile bond. The sigil pulsed gently, as if affirming the connection, its silver light warming the cavern's chill. "Judgment is not vengeance," she said softly, her fingers brushing his in the dimness, a tentative bridge over the abyss of their pasts. The touch ignited something primal, a spark of tenderness amid the pain, like fire kindled in snow. Outside, the storm raged, wolves howling in chorus with the pursuing pack. But here, in this sanctuary of stone and shadow, the first threads of alliance wove between them, born of necessity, tempered by the moon's quiet mercy. Yet as the sigil's glow steadied, Lionea felt a deeper stirring within, a hidden power uncoiling like roots in fertile earth, waiting to reveal itself under Elowen's watchful eye. What refuge could shield them when the court's shadows closed in, demanding answers etched in blood? The cavern's depths cradled them like the womb of the earth, its walls slick with the slow seep of hidden springs that murmured secrets in the tongue of stone. Lionea leaned against the rough-hewn rock, the chill leaching into her bones, yet the lunar sigil on her forehead pulsed with an insistent warmth, a counterpoint to the frost that clung to her skin like a lover's reluctant farewell. Malric sat across from her in the dimness, his broad frame hunched. The torch he had kindled from damp tinder casting flickering shadows that danced across his scarred features. The flame spat and hissed, feeding on the sparse wood scavenged from the entrance, its orange glow warring with the sigil's silver light to paint their sanctuary in hues of fire and moon, red embers against pale luminescence, blood and frost intertwined. She watched him through half-lidded eyes, the Omega in her attuned to the subtle tremors of his breath, the way his fingers flexed against his knees as if grasping for anchors in a storm-tossed sea. Guilt hung heavy in the air between them, thicker than the cavern's mist, scented with the earthy tang of moss and the faint, lingering copper of her resurrection. His eyes, those storm-gray depths that had once commanded courts and crushed rebellions, now held a vulnerability that tugged at her, unbidden and raw. He had shielded her on the bridge, his body a bulwark against the arrows and accusations, yet she sensed the fracture in him. The king who had sacrificed her to preserve a peace built on lies, now adrift in the wake of Elowen's intervention. "Why?" Malric's voice broke the silence, low and ragged, echoing off the walls like a confession offered to the void. He leaned forward, the torchlight carving hollows beneath his cheekbones, illuminating the faint scar along his jaw, a memento from a southern blade that had nearly claimed his life during the last border skirmish. The axe was true. I felt the pack's judgment seal it. Yet here you stand, marked by her hand. What curse have I unleashed upon Eldridge? Lyonea's hand drifted to the scar at her neck, the thin silver line that throbbed in rhythm with the sigil, a living testament to the goddess's weave. The touch ignited something deeper, a stirring that had begun in the forest's embrace and now uncoiled within her like roots seeking light. She had always felt it faintly, a whisper in her dreams, visions of paths unseen, truths veiled in moonlight. But death had stripped away the barriers, leaving her raw and receptive. The cavern seemed to narrow, the air thickening with the scent of impending snow from the world above, carried on drafts that whispered through fissures in the rock. Outside, the wind howled in mournful cadence, wolves answering in distant chorus, their cries a lament for the hunted and the hunter alike. "I am no curse," she replied, her voice a fragile thread laced with the chill that seeped into her lungs. Fear coiled in her chest, not of him, but of the power awakening, vast and untamed, like a river breaking free of winter's ice. She closed her eyes, and the sigil flared brighter, its light spilling across the cavern like spilled mercury, illuminating veins of quartz in the stone that gleamed like captured stars. Images flooded her then, not memories, but revelations, sharp as shattered glass. The quartz-shadowed corners where Lord Varen had poured poison into goblets under cover of night. Not herbs from her gathering, but his own alchemical spite to frame her and weaken Malric's rule. Faces twisted in deceit, betas whispering to southern envoys, alphas bartering alliances with blood oaths that betrayed the moon's sacred pacts. And deeper still, a vision of Malric himself, crowned in thorns of duty, his soul shadowed by an ancient curse woven into the royal bloodline. The southern clan's sorcery that bound his heart to endless war, draining his strength until the kingdom crumbled. She gasped, the visions crashing over her like a glacial wave, her body arching against the stone as the power manifested fully. Her hands trembled, palms glowing with ethereal silver, threads of light weaving from her fingertips to encircle Malric like lunar vines. He recoiled at first, his alpha instincts flaring, eyes widening, a low growl rumbling in his throat, but the light did not burn. It soothed, drawing forth the hidden wound in his chest, a faint, blackened sigil mirroring her own, etched by the curse of his forebears' betrayals. The air hummed with spiritual resonance, the cavern's springs bubbling louder, as if the earth itself bore witness to the unveiling. Malric's breath hitched, his hand pressing to his heart where the mark now pulsed visibly beneath his tunic, a dark crescent warring with the encroaching silver. "Elowen's pathfinder," he whispered, awe fracturing his voice, the melancholy in his gaze giving way to a dawning clarity. He reached out, his calloused fingers brushing hers, the contact sending a jolt through them both, instinctive, undeniable, yet resisted by the ghosts of their pasts. In her eyes, he saw the key to his destiny, not vengeance against the traitors, but redemption through her gift, the ability to reveal hidden truths and sever curses under the moon's gaze. She was no mere Omega returned. She was the herald who could unmake the lies that chained his realm, forcing a choice between the throne's iron grip and the compassion that might save it. Lyanea pulled back, the visions receding like a tide, leaving her drained and trembling, the sigil's glow dimming to a soft ember. Empathy warred with wariness in her heart, the tenderness born of their shared flight now deepened by this revelation, yet shadowed by the moral weight it imposed. To wield this power meant confronting the court, exposing Varen's web of treason, but at what cost? Her own freedom or his soul's fragile peace? The torch sputtered, casting their faces in intimate shadow, the wind outside rising to a wail that carried the faint echo of pursuing howls. Malric's hand lingered in the space between them, an unspoken plea, as the first drops of cavern water traced paths down the walls like tears from the goddess herself. What was strength, if not embracing a destiny that demanded judgment over mercy, or mercy over the throne's cold justice. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The cavern's fragile sanctuary shattered with the first light of false dawn, gray fingers of mist creeping through the fissures like spies from the waking world. Leonia stirred against the stone, her body heavy with the residue of revelation, the lunar sigil on her forehead a dull throb now, as if the goddess herself had withdrawn to watch from afar. Malric's form across from her was still, his chest rising and falling in the rhythm of uneasy sleep, the cursed mark on his heart faintly visible through the rent in his tunic, a shadowed twin to her own light. The air hung thick with the scent of damp earth and smoldering torch ash, the night's confessions lingering like smoke, binding them in a web of unspoken alliance. Yet as the wind outside shifted from wail to whisper, carrying the distant clamor of horns and hounds, Leonia felt the pull of judgment uncoiling within her, vast and inexorable, demanding she face the pack that had devoured her life. She rose silently, the chill of the cavern floor seeping into her bare feet. Each step a measured defiance against the fear that clawed at her ribs. The power stirred anew, not as visions now, but as an instinctive clarity, a pathfinder's gift, revealing the hidden trails through deceit and stone. The sigil warmed, guiding her hand to a narrow crevice where moonlight pooled like spilled silver, illuminating a forgotten passage that snaked toward the castle's underbelly. Malric awoke with a start, his gray eyes snapping open, shadowed by the melancholy that etched his features deeper in the half-light. He reached for her instinctively, his fingers grazing her wrist, sending a jolt of connection through her, alpha to omega, guilt to grace. But she pulled away, the touch a reminder of the chasm still yawning between them. "We cannot hide forever," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her soul, laced with the forest's lingering hush. The wind carried the baying of hounds closer, their howls mingling with the guttural shouts of the hunt, Varen's voice rising above the fray, a venomous bark promising blood for the witch's return. Malric stood, his frame towering yet bowed, the weight of his crown's invisible thorns pressing him earthward. Guilt flickered in his gaze, a storm cloud over steel, as he donned his cloak, the fabric whispering against scars that told of wars fought for a throne built on fragile oaths. "The court will tear us apart," he murmured, his breath fogging the air. "But if your light can expose the rot, then let it burn. I will stand with you, Leonia, not as king, but as the fool who failed you once." The passage led them upward through veins of quartz-veined rock, the sigil's glow their only lantern, casting elongated shadows that twisted like tormented spirits. Leonia's heart pounded, each beat a drum of moral reckoning, forgiveness for the man who had turned away, or war against the lies that had slain her. The omega in her yearned for the tenderness glimpsed in his protective stance, the way his presence warded the cold like a hearth's embrace. Yet freedom whispered of paths untaken, a life beyond the pack's iron jaws. They emerged into the castle's undercroft, a labyrinth of forgotten vaults where the air reeked of mold and ancient blood, the walls etched with faded lunar sigils from a time when omegas were seers, not sacrifices. The confrontation erupted without mercy, the court's fury spilling into the great hall above like a breached dam. Leonia ascended the spiral stairs first, the sigil flaring to life as they burst into the throne room, torches sputtering in iron sconces, their flames leaping like startled beasts. The pack assembled in chaotic splendor, betas in steel-gray livery, alphas from the southern clans with eyes gleaming like polished obsidian. And at their center, Lord Varen, his hulking form astride a throne of borrowed power, the usurper's ambition writ in the sneer curling his lips. The air thrummed with tension, thick with the musk of fear and aggression, snow gusting through arrow-slit windows to dust the flagstones in white. Gasps rippled through the assembly as Leonia stepped forward, her tattered shift a banner of resurrection, Malric at her side, sword drawn but held low, a gesture of restraint amid the rising storm. "Vampire! Abomination!" Varen roared, leaping to his feet, his claws extending with a snick of bone and sinew, the rival Alpha's frame rippling with the shift toward beast. He had orchestrated her fall, the poisoned goblets swapped in the night. Whispers to the envoys framing her as a wraith summoner to erode Malric's rule. Now, his eyes narrowed on the sigil, terror masking his rage, for it marked her as Eloin's chosen, the pathfinder who could unravel his web. The pack surged, a tide of snarls and drawn blades, betas loyal to the throne, clashing with southern interlopers in a frenzy of fur and steel. Blood sprayed across the hall, hot and coppery, mingling with the snow that swirled like ash from a pyre, the metallic tang sharp on Leonea's tongue. Malric met the charge, his sword a blur of ancient steel, parrying Varen's savage lunge with a clash that echoed like thunder off the vaulted ceiling. "Stand down," he bellowed, his voice a Alpha's command, laced with the gravel of exhaustion. But the hall devolved into chaos, fangs bared, claws raking flesh, the throne toppling in a crash of splintered oak. Leonea wove through the melee, the sigil blazing, her hands outstretched as the power surged. Silver threads erupted from her palms, lancing toward the traitors like lunar arrows, piercing not bodies, but illusions. Visions flooded the air, projected for all to see. Varen's midnight treasons, his alchemical vials glinting in torchlight, the southern oaths sworn in blood to dismantle Eldridge from within. The pack faltered, eyes widening in horror, the air humming with spiritual indictment as truths peeled back like frost from glass. Varen howled, lunging at her with feral desperation, his jaws snapping inches from her throat, but Malric intercepted, driving him back with a blow that split the rival's shoulder, blood blooming dark against fur. Leonea's gaze locked with the king's amid the fray, their bond a lifeline in the storm, his eyes pleading for redemption, hers torn between the freedom of letting the pack consume itself and the compassion that bound her to him. "End it," he gasped, blood trickling from a gash on his brow, the cursed mark on his chest flaring in agony. But as Varen rallied his allies, the hall a whirlwind of weavos and clashing metal, Leonea faced the choice. Unleash the full wrath of her gift, dooming the traitors to Eloin's unyielding judgment and igniting war's endless cycle, or temper it with mercy, forgiving the pack's blindness and claiming a love that demanded her chains anew. The sigil burned hottest then, illuminating the moral precipice, love as redemption's proof, not its prize, freedom a solitary path through snow-swept wilds, or war a forge for souls scarred by betrayal. Blood pooled at her feet, warm against the encroaching cold, the moon's gaze through the windows, a silent arbiter, as the weight of the kingdom pressed upon her resurrected heart. What was true strength, if not the mercy to spare the guilty, even as they bayed for her blood once more? The great hall of Eldridge Keep devolved into a maelstrom of fur and fury, the air thick with the acrid bite of blood and the primal musk of shifting forms. Leonea stood at the heart of it, her bare feet rooted to the flagstones slick with crimson, the lunar sigil on her forehead a blazing corona that pierced the chaos like a defiant star. Silver threads from her outstretched hands wove through the fray, unraveling Varen's deceptions with merciless clarity. Visions of his poisoned vials shattering illusions, southern oaths sworn in shadowed alcoves, the rival Alpha's claws dripping with the ink of forged accusations. The pack recoiled, betas faltering mid-strike, their loyalties fracturing like ice under the sun, while southern interlopers snarled in cornered rage, their eyes wild with the terror of exposure. Malric fought at her flank, his sword a silver arc in the torchlight, each parry a testament to the guilt that fueled his strikes. Blood traced rivulets down his arm from a claw rake across his shoulder, the cursed mark on his chest throbbing in sync with her sigil, a dark echo demanding resolution. He was no longer the distant king who had averted his gaze at her execution. Here, in the visceral press of battle, he was a shield forged from remorse, his gray eyes locking with hers amid the whirlwind, pleading not for victory, but for the mercy she alone could grant. The wind howled through the arrow slits, carrying snowflakes that melted on heated skin, turning the hall into a frozen forge where destinies clashed like hammered steel. Lyonea's breath came in ragged gasps, the power surging through her veins like molten silver, searing and sublime. It was no gift of vengeance, this Pathfinder's sight. It peeled back the layers of the pack's soul, revealing the rot beneath their oaths, the betas who had whispered her name in envy, the alphas whose ambitions had fed on her innocence like wolves on carrion. Varen circled them now, his massive frame half-shifted, fur matted with sweat and blood, his yellow eyes fixed on her with the hatred of a cornered beast. He had been the architect of her fall, slipping toxins into the royal hunt stores to mimic her herbal gatherings, framing her as a wraith-caller to sow discord and claim Malric's throne through the chaos of war. "Lies from a dead whore," he bellowed, his voice a guttural thunder that drowned the howls, lunging with claws extended, aiming to rend the sigil from her flesh. She sidestepped, the sigil flaring to illuminate his approach, threads of light lashing out to bind his limbs in ethereal chains. He thrashed against them, foam flecking his jaws, the visions assaulting him personally now, his own kin betrayed in southern marshes, sold for alliances that promised power but delivered only isolation. The pack watched, transfixed, the air humming with spiritual weight, the moon's pale gaze filtering through the storm-lashed windows like Elowin's unblinking judgment. Lyanea felt the moral precipice yawn beneath her, vast and unforgiving. To unleash the full tide of revelation would expose every traitor, purging the court in a flood of truth that might shatter Eldridge into warring shards, igniting the very war Malric had sacrificed her to avert. Or to withhold. To temper the light with forgiveness, binding her fate to the pack's fragile unity. And to him, the king whose touch stirred a forbidden ache in her core. Her heart twisted, introspection crashing like waves against the roar of combat. Freedom beckoned, a solitary path through the snow-veiled wilds, where she could vanish as the goddess's herald, unbound by the chains of loyalty or love. Yet the Omega in her recoiled from the isolation, drawn to the melancholy depth in Malric's eyes, the way his presence warded her like a hearth against eternal winter. He had chosen duty over her life once, turning away as the axe fell, but now he bled for her redemption, his sword arm faltering under the curse's drain, the blackened sigil on his chest leaching his strength like poison in the blood. What was love, if not the proof of choices remade? Not a reward for survival, but a forge where guilt met grace, where an Omega's light could heal a king's shadowed wound, or consume it. Varen broke free with a savage roar, shattering the silver bonds, his bulk slamming into Malric and sending them both crashing against the throne's splintered remnants. The king grunted, blood blooming on his lip, his sword skittering across the stone as claws raked his side. Lyanea surged forward, the power coiling in her chest like a storm about to break. She could end it, channel the sigil's wrath to strike Varen down, his body dissolving into lunar mist. A divine execution that would cow the pack into submission. The traitors would kneel, the southern clans retreat in fear, but at the cost of her soul's quietus, war averted through fear, not healing, chaining her to a throne stained with more blood. Or mercy, reveal the truths without destruction, offering the pack a chance to choose atonement, forgiving even as her heart screamed for justice. The hall fell into a breathless hush amid the dying clashes, the pack circling warily, breaths heaving like bellows in the forge. Varen rose, pinning Malric beneath his weight, fangs bared at her throat. "Finish it, witch," he snarled, the rival's breath hot and fetid, his eyes gleaming with desperate triumph. Lyanea's hands trembled, silver light gathering at her palms. The sigil's warmth spreading to her scars. the neck's thin line, the wrist's faint crescent, binding her past to this moment. Malric met her gaze from the floor, his voice a strained whisper amid the blood pooling beneath him. "Choose us, Lionea, not for me, for what we could mend." The wind outside crescendoed to a wail, snow lashing the walls like the earth's own fury. Weavos distant yet insistent, as if the wilds themselves urged her onward. Tears traced her cheeks, cold as frost, mingling with the sweat of exertion. Love or liberty, pardon or perdition, the dilemma etched itself into her spirit, a spiritual forge where redemption's flame tested her resolve. The sigil pulsed once, twice, illuminating the hall in blinding silver. The pack's faces a mosaic of awe and dread. In that suspended breath, Lionea extended her hands, the light not erupting in cataclysm, but flowing like a river of mercy, washing over Varen and the assembly, forcing truths without the blade's final kiss. He staggered back, collapsing to his knees, confessions spilling from his lips in broken howls, the curse on Malric flickering as her gift began to unravel its hold. Yet as the pack knelt, heads bowed under the moon's revelation, doubt lingered in her heart, a quiet storm of what-ifs, the freedom she had glimpsed now traded for this fragile bond. Malric rose, hand outstretched, his touch a promise of union forged in trial, but the weight of her choice pressed like eternal snow, whispering of sacrifices yet to come. What strength was mercy if it bound the healer as tightly as the healed? The silver light ebbed from Leonea's palms like a retreating tide, leaving the great hall steeped in the hush of revelation, where truths hung heavy as the snow-laden air drifting through the shattered windows. Varen slumped to the flagstones, his massive form shuddering with the force of his own unraveling, confession spilling from his bloodied maw in ragged gasps, each word a thorn tearing at the pack's illusions. The southern alphas knelt beside him, their ambitions exposed like veins beneath frostbitten skin, eyes downcast under the weight of Eloan's gaze. Blood pooled in irregular patterns across the stone, warm and viscous, mingling with melting snow to form rivulets that traced paths toward the fallen throne, as if the earth itself sought to wash away the stains of betrayal. The wind outside had stilled to a mournful sigh, carrying faint weavos from the wilds, a chorus that echoed the pack's fractured howls, now silenced in awe. Leonea stood amid the remnants of chaos, her body trembling from the power's aftershocks. The lunar sigil on her forehead, a soft ember that warmed her chilled flesh like a hidden hearth. Exhaustion clawed at her edges, the Omega's instincts warring with the Pathfinder's burden. Mercy had flowed from her hands, not wrath, sparing the guilty from divine dissolution and offering the pack a bridge to atonement. Yet the choice carved deep into her spirit, a wound that mirrored the thin silver scar at her neck, pulsing with the quiet ache of what she had forsaken. Freedom, that solitary whisper through snow-veiled paths, now felt distant as the moon's far side, traded for this fragile unity where love demanded her chains as much as it healed them. Her hazel eyes, still aglow with ethereal clarity, lifted to Malric, who leaned against a pillar, his chest heaving, the cursed mark on his heart flickering like a dying flame under her gift's touch. He met her stare, his storm-gray eyes stripped of their melancholy veil, revealing the raw vulnerability of a king reborn in the forge of her light. Blood traced a slow path from the gash on his brow, dripping onto the collar of his tunic, where the blackened sigil began to fade, threads of silver weaving through the darkness like roots reclaiming poisoned soil. The air between them hummed with the residue of their bond. Instinctive, resisted once by fear and duty, now accepted in the quiet spaces left by the storm. Malric extended his hand, calloused fingers scarred by battles long past, not as command, but as supplication, the warmth of his skin cutting through the hall's encroaching chill. "You chose us," he whispered, voice rough as gravel under snow, laced with the wonder of redemption's dawn. Not for glory, but for what mercy might build from these ruins. She hesitated, the wind stirring her chestnut hair like spectral fingers, carrying the metallic tang of blood and the faint, earthy scent of the forest beyond the walls. Introspection flooded her, slow and visceral. The tenderness that had bloomed in the cavern's shadows now deepened into something profound. A union forged not in passion's fire, but in the slow burn of shared wounds. He had been her betrayer, the alpha whose averted gaze had sealed her fate at dawn. Yet in this hall, he had bled for her light. His guilt a bridge she could no longer cross alone. The sigil pulsed gently, affirming the weave of their destinies, its silver glow casting reflections in his eyes like captured stars. What was rebirth, if not the sacrifice of isolation for the risk of healing? Love as proof, not prize, a choice to bind her light to his shadow, curing the curse that had chained his soul to endless war. Leonia stepped forward, her bare feet leaving faint imprints in the blood-smeared snow, the pack's gazes upon her a tapestry of fear and reverence. She placed her hand in his, the contact igniting a spark that spread through her veins, warm and unyielding, the Omega's essence entwining with the Alpha's resolve. Together, they turned to the assembly, the hall's torches sputtering back to life, their flames leaping higher as if fed by the moon's quiet approval. Varen's confessions echoed in the silence, the rival Alpha crawling forward on broken limbs, his voice a hoarse plea for the mercy she had already extended. "The goddess judges through you," one beta murmured, head bowed, while southern envoys shifted uneasily, their claws retracting in the face of truths laid bare. Malric's grip tightened, not in possession, but in solidarity, his free hand pressing to his chest where the curse dissolved fully, the blackened sigil blooming into silver under her influence. A mirror to her own mark, their wounds now shared scars of redemption. The kingdom's fragile peace, once propped by lies and blood oaths, began to reform in this moment, the pack rising slowly, oaths renewed not in fear, but in the spiritual clarity her gift had unveiled. Yet Leonia felt the weight of it all, the moral precipice she had navigated, choosing compassion over power, union over liberty. Tears traced her cheeks, cold as frost-kissed petals, as the first true light of dawn pierced the storm clouds, gilding the hall in gold and silver, the moon fading but its sigil eternal on her skin. In that union, sacrifice and cure intertwined, their hands clasped as the pack knelt, the wind whispering promises of a realm reborn. Eldridge Keep stood not as a fortress of ice and iron, but as a temple to Eloin's mercy, where an executed Omega and a guilt-ridden king forged destiny from the ashes of judgment. The sigil's warmth lingered, a beacon against the encroaching winter, as Leonia leaned into Malric's side, the tenderness born of pain now aflame to endure the nights ahead. Rebirth was no easy dawn. It was the quiet strength to choose love's proof, even as the wilds howled their eternal challenge. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.